Here. This is Skimmer, and Skimmer is a young male opossum. Hanging on to this. There you go, buddy. Here he is. Alright, so this is Skimmer. He's not yet fully grown, although he's more or less getting to his adult size. So he is still a juvenile male opossum. And these male opossums can weigh anywhere from about 12 to 16 pounds on average, all the way up to 20 pounds, depending on the part of the country that you're looking at them. So where it tends to get colder, you might find them a little bit larger. They've packed on a little bit more fat. Here in California, an average size for a male opossum might be about 12 pounds, or a little bit leaner. So he's still got some growing to do, obviously. He's only about, right now, about 7 pounds. So he's still got some muscle mass to build. So he's a young guy. Now you might be wondering why he's here at the zoo in the first place as opposed to out in the wild. Well, oftentimes unfortunate things can happen. Tragedy can strike, and Skimmer was orphaned as a teeny tiny little baby. So he lost his mom, he lost his siblings, and he wouldn't have been able to survive on his own. So a good Samaritan, the person, found him in their backyard, and well, he happened to be floating in their pool at the time. Swimming, yeah. So they fished him out of their pool with the little pool skimmer, hence his name is Skimmer, and they brought him to the Living Desert, where we have a rehabilitation center for native wildlife animals. So since he was too young at the time, we had to continue raising him by ourselves. And when animals are very young and they still need to be raised up by humans, oftentimes what will happen is they'll become imprinted. Imprinted means they lose all sorts of their wild attitude towards humans. They become a lot more tolerant of humans than is really necessary and important for wild animals to be. So this imprinting would have a detrimental effect on his ability to get along out there in the wild. He probably wouldn't be able to defend for himself or take care of himself or be as wary as he should be. So he's stuck here living at the Living Desert for the rest of his life. He wouldn't make it out on his own, but we put him to work. You know, we've assigned him a job here in our programs department at the zoo, and now it's his job to be an ambassador animal, an educational animal, and that's exactly what he's going to do for you guys today. He's going to teach you things you may or may not have known about opossums. Now, these are a really neat animal, especially in the context of where they live, which is North America. Now, the full name for this particular species of opossum is called a Virginia opossum, which might lead you to believe that they are originally from the South, you know, more in a different part of the country, but obviously they reach all over the place. They've spread not only from the South, the Southwest, up into the Midwest, the Northeast, the Northwest. They're everywhere, up into Canada, down and into Mexico. So probably a lot of that has to do with what I mentioned before. They're a very adaptable animal that's very good at scavenging and taking opportunities. They're an opportunistic animal, especially when it comes to finding food. Now, as you can see here, I've scattered some little Cheerios and Fruit Loops for Skimmer to find, hopefully to get him moving around for you guys so you can see how these guys sort of look when they're mobile. He is a little shy though still, so it's going to take a little bit for him to leave the comfort of his little pig blankie here. But hopefully he'll start moving around. So these guys go from place to place, but usually during their own lifetimes they'll kind of stick to one generalized area that they're comfortable with, that they know. Oh, that's a big yawn. Now, living all over North America, they hold the distinction of being the only marsupial animal that we have within our borders here in the United States. Now, marsupial is a funny word, but maybe you guys have already heard it before. Does anybody happen to know what a marsupial is referring to? Yeah.
It's an animal with a pouch, kind of like a kangaroo.
Exactly right. That is the perfect answer. Yes. Marsupials are a specialized subset of mammalians in that they reproduce in a different way. They don't reproduce in a uterus. They reproduce or raise their young in a pouch, kind of on the outside of their body a little bit. That has a little bit of exposure to sunlight and air. So totally different from the way we as mammals do it, or other mammals that we're familiar with, everything from dogs to cats up to dolphins to walruses. They all give birth in the same way we do, but not so for marsupials. They're a little bit stranger. So birth, or birth as we're familiar with, takes place for these guys only a couple weeks after conception, after the baby is first formed. So it's very, very tiny and underdeveloped at this point in time when it comes out of mom and goes into her pouch. So if you can imagine, the babies at this point look like little tiny pink jelly beans. Very, very underdeveloped. So they still have a lot of growing and developing to do. But that all takes place in the pouch. The mom has nursing stations in the pouch where the babies get nutrients or fed all the calories and food that they need to continue to grow. So they actually will grow in the pouch for 2 to 3 months before they start venturing out a little bit. So by the time they're ready to venture out, they've grown from that little teeny tiny jelly bean all the way up to like the size of a Rice Krispie treat, right? A little cookie here. So they are ready to start poking their head out. They've got eyes, they've got furs, they've got their senses. And what they'll do rather than going all the way out away from mom is they'll start climbing out and hanging out on her back in a little row. And sometimes she can have quite a few of these babies that she has to carry around with her. A litter for a female opossum can consist anywhere from 5 babies up to 12. Yeah, so quite a few at a time. So that's a lot of weight for her to carry around. So as you can imagine, she doesn't have to do it for long. Luckily for her, once the babies are ready to come out of the pouch, it's not going to be too much longer before they're ready to head off on their own. So probably just another 3 to 4 weeks maximum before they leave mom and start learning how to be an opossum on their own. So these guys, like I said, there's not much for them to learn other than how to search for food, but a lot of that is instinctual. Mom will probably tell them how to seek shelter. But another thing that they can't learn from mom that is purely driven by instinct for these animals is how they avoid predators. They actually have a very unique defensive mechanism that is very, very interesting and quite counterintuitive, meaning it's not something you or I would think to do when we're facing a scary predator out there in the wild. So we typically have what's called a fight or flight response. When we're faced with a threat, what we'll either do is we'll choose to stand our ground and duke it out, or we'll try to run away. And well, that's not really an option if you're an opossum. Check him out here, our friend Skimmer. He's kind of clumsy looking overall. Does he look like he could run very fast? No, he wouldn't get very far, especially when he's being chased by a really fast predator like a coyote or a bobcat. They could outrun him easily. Now let's look at his fighting. Does he have really long claws? No, he doesn't really have long claws. He has little teeny tiny nails that are mostly good for gripping on the tree bark or fences or things like that when he's climbing. Now his mouth is pretty big. You might have seen him yawning there a second ago, and he does actually have an impressive display of teeth. These guys can have 50 or so teeth, which is a really high average for a mammal. But the thing about these teeth is most of them are really small. They're only like the size of about a ½ an inch or shorter. So you might have a lot of teeth, but they're not going to be able to do a lot of damage to a predator that they're trying to fight. So they actually don't have as much fighting strength as they would need as well. They're not like an alligator or a crocodile, even though they still have that big pointed mouth. So when it comes to fighting, they would probably come off the loser in just about any battle they undertook. So they can't run away, they can't fight, so they have to do something else completely different. Have you guys ever heard of playing possum? You've heard of playing possum, right? Does anybody tell me what it means to play possum? Go ahead.
It means playing dead.
That's right, that's what it means. So that is how they will save themselves if they're under threat from an outside source like a predator especially. So I'm going to tell you guys how playing possum works. It's really, really neat. Now first of all, I have to tell you, it's not something that these guys consciously decide to do. Like when we decide to play, it's something we think, hey, I want to start playing. It's not that for them, so it's kind of a misleading name. It's purely instinct on their part, meaning their body just reacts without them making any decisions about it. So what happens is first instinct that gets triggered for these guys is they get very scared by being in the presence of a threat or a predator. They get nervous, they get anxious, they get so worked up about it. In fact, their blood pressure's rising, they're shaking a little bit sometimes, that their blood pressure will rise to the point where they'll pass out. So they faint. When these guys get way too upset, they'll faint. That's the first step in playing possum, is they're laying there passed out. All right, and then the next step is their muscles will get really, really stiff. This might seem a little strange to us, especially if we're familiar with when we faint as humans, we get really limp. That's that old test when you want to know if your friend is just faking it or if they really are passed out. You hold their hand above their head, and if they let it fall on their face, then they really are passed out. Well, these guys, you could never do that to them because if you tried to move their muscles, they would just feel like a rock. So this is an interesting sort of physiological process that's happened here. And what it is thought to be doing is mimicking a biological process that takes place for dead things. Things that are dead will sometimes go through rigor mortis, and that the muscles become very stiff for a period of time after death. Another thing that they're going to do to play dead in a similar way is they want to imitate the smells of death. Yeah, deathly smells. Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but suffice to say, the way that you or I can emit smells? Yeah, you know how you make smells. They do the same thing. But their smells are very, very, very odoriferous, very rank, very stinky. It doesn't just smell like, rotten eggs or gym socks. Oh no, their stink is up to another level. In fact, they can smell like death. And that's exactly what they do. They want to smell like dead, rotting meat. Really disgusting. Almost makes you want to gag. And that's the whole point. So not only do they look dead, they feel dead, they also smell dead. This is why this is very important. Most predators that you can think of, like canines, like felines, are very sense-driven animals, meaning they rely greatly on this, especially their sense of smell and their hearing and their sight. So everything that their senses are telling them about this opossum is saying that it's been dead for quite some time, for a few days, and it's already started to rot and kind of spoil. So even though this animal is perfectly alive, it's just passed out, it's playing a trick on this predator. It's deceiving them into believing that it's been dead for quite some time. And that's not what predators want. They like a fresh meal. They like their meat to be fresh, just like you or I. Because if you eat spoiled meat, it can make you sick. Even if you're a dog or cat, you don't want to feed your dog or cat spoiled meat. They'll get a tummy ache. And predators in the wild want to avoid this, especially because they don't have veterinary service out in the wild. There's nobody that can take care of them. So if they're out for the count for a few days, it's not going to be great for them. They might be weakened. It might really lead to some bad things for them. So instead, they're just going to avoid the trouble. They're not going to take the time or bother to eat that spoiled meat. They'll go look for a meal that's more fresh. Now, there are some things out there that can eat spoiled meat, but they're very few and they have very specialized digestive systems. You might be thinking of animals that are carrion eaters or dead thing eaters like vultures. I'm going to tell you a little secret about vultures. Vultures cannot even eat rotting meat. They can eat things that have been dead for like maybe a day. So before it started to turn, it's still relatively fresh. Vultures can eat that. But if it's older than starting to spoil, then they can't do it. Things that can eat and digest rotting meat are insects and bacteria. That's about it. Those types of things are what break down these corpses, part of the natural cycle of life, turning it back into dirt. So those types of things can do that, but nothing else really that would be a main predator or a threat to an opossum. So the system that they have will typically work out pretty well for them. That predator will become very uninterested, disgusted, repulsed. They'll walk away, leave the possum alone, and then after a period of time that varies greatly, they'll just wake back up again. Just like you or I will come out of a faint. They will too, and they'll shake it off, and they'll continue about their business. Perfectly unscathed. Now, you might have already noticed a couple holes in this plan for the opossums, some scenarios or cases where it wouldn't really work out for them. Now the first step we mentioned is that they have to become scared. Well, an instance where they're not going to become scared is if they're caught by surprise, right? If they're ambushed by a predator. And a lot of predators are very good at ambushing. You know, felines especially, they like to stalk their prey from a distance and then pounce. So that might not work out if a possum isn't aware that predator's there. They're not going to have time to pass out and play possum. So they'll probably just get eaten in that case. Unfortunate for them. So it's not a perfect system, but you know what? These guys have remained unchanged for millions upon millions of years, so they're still going pretty strong. Now, they might look a lot like rodents and have some similarities to rodents in that they have very short lives and they breed at a very high rate. So they are considered to be a prey animal. But as far as that defensive mechanism goes, that playing possum, relatively unique to these guys. There are a few other animals in the world that do that sort of thing. I can name fainting goats off the top of my head. They pass out when they get too freaked out. But these guys, they're pretty much the sole marsupial that do that sort of thing. So it's really interesting evolution that these guys have had. Another interesting thing about opossums is even though we call them marsupials and sort of relate them in our minds to kangaroos and koalas, the truth of the matter is you will never find an opossum in Australia. Australia is where the vast majority of other marsupials live, but not so for these guys. So a long, long time ago, way in the distant past, these original marsupials, or ancestors, branched off from all those Australian ones. They diverged, they separated into two different continents. So the other marsupials that these guys are related to are really pretty much only other opossums. And there's many species of opossums that live in the rainforests of South America, but the Virginia opossum, the opossum that we're familiar with, is the only one that you can find in the United States. So a really special, neat animal that just wants to go about its business, be left alone, even though we can find them in our own neighborhoods and areas, and get a little bit freaked out by them. Well, trust me, you're probably scaring that opossum as much as it's scaring you if you ever encounter each other face to face. So all you have to do is, just back away, let it go about its business. If it's in your home, maybe call animal control, but otherwise, that opossum is not going to do you any harm. They just would much prefer to be left alone. Any questions about opossums or skimmer here? Yeah.
So when they're playing dead, just like their heart rate and respiratory rate come down too?
Yeah, just like when you're passed out, similar thing. It doesn't go completely to a stop, but it slows down. Very much so.
When the fainting goats do it, is it the same process? Do they?
Probably very similar. It has to do with blood pressure.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think fainting goats, a part of their problem is breeding. Breeding has resulted in sort of a weaker animal. So I don't know how naturalistic it is for the fainting goats. Because goats have been domesticated for thousands of years. Unlike the opossums. Yeah.
Like possums? How did they not get eaten by the dinosaurs?
Well, they weren't around at the same time. These guys came after dinosaurs.
Oh, I thought I saw some, in a book, I saw some possums.
Well, you know what? That's a really good observation because these guys are probably a very primitive type of animal. Marsupials are probably what came before. Mammals that are more sophisticated, like you or I, or even like a dog or a cat or a dolphin.
And how did they survive the volcano eruption?
Well, Virginia opossums didn't have to, but some of their ancestors did. And it didn't take very many, just a few of them, and those few animals survived those very harsh extreme conditions and repopulated the world and continued to evolve into all different species. So that's a great question. You're a scientist and making it. Yeah.
I'm repeating a question. I was asked, what is bacteria? And I didn't have a good way of describing that. So could you?
They're single-celled organisms, so something that's teeny tiny that you can't see with your regular eye. You have to look at it under a microscope, and it's a very primitive form of life, So all our cells that make up our whole body, it's just one thing. And bacteria can digest things like rotten meat, and that's what causes things to split. Yeah, I'm not very good at describing bacteria either. Other questions? All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming out, meeting Skimmer. He looks like he's ready to cuddle back up with his piggy, so I'll put him back home. And if you guys are interested in checking out the reptile show, that's going to happen in about 10 minutes over in the Watutu Village. And then another encounter similar to this will happen at the Discovery Center at noon, so that's worth checking out if you guys are still around then. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Oh, Skimmer. You ready to go back in your thing?
He goes, no, I like it out here.
Oh, you're right. Can you guys put it
How is the sense of smell?
They have a really good sense of smell. Their eyesight is fairly poor, but their sense of smell is really good.
Oh, okay.
Alright, bye everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thanks, Skimmer.
I hope you enjoyed this video.